Welcome to Season 3 of Busting Addiction and Its Myths, sponsored by Safe House Rehab Thailand, where we offer a modern approach to recovery, breaking with tradition by introducing new technologies that help disrupt the cycle of addiction. To learn more, visit us at safehouserehab.com and click on the video, or contact us at info@safehouserehab.com, and we'll tell you about our $1,000 airfare allowance and referral rewards program. My name is Bruno J., and here's why I created this podcast. Our research has shown that despite the opioid epidemic and the worldwide panic over the ravages of addiction, we didn't see that treatment centers were doing anything different to break the cycle more effectively and improve the odds of long-term success. So we have set out to do things differently and to let all those who love an addict or alcoholic know more about the advances in treatment that we represent. Here's what we're doing differently. We have designed our diagnostics and detox to isolate and treat opioid and multi-addiction, example, alcohol plus opioids plus speed, more effectively, given that these are the new challenges of addiction in the 21st century. We integrate leading-edge technology into the recovering process, thereby disrupting the disorder, speeding the recovery of brain health. Clients come to treatment with damaged brains. This is a given. We pay attention to the importance of dopamine and other ingredients vital to brain health recovery. Traditional rehabs don't provide anywhere near the tools and close guidance that clients truly need to help keep them clean and sober for life. We do it right. First, we advise our clients to go into our sober living facility to serve as a transition to normal life, and we absolutely outperform traditional rehabs when it comes to providing a structure for long-term recovery. So if you love an addict or alcoholic and you feel like your loved one is sucking the oxygen out of your life, is stealing your money, stealing your peace of mind and your sanity, this podcast is for you. If you're feeling rage and shame and he or she is living rent-free in your head 24/7, this podcast is for you. I hope to have you gain a better understanding of the nature of addictive disorder and the invisible effect it has on your psyche. It's my fervent hope you also gain a little more compassion for your loved one and for yourself, in spite of this cunning, baffling, and powerful disease. To paraphrase an author in this space, we struggle because we love. Hi, Bruno J. This is episode 5 of Season 3 with Andrew. Hi, Bruno J. We're going to interview today a young fellow by the name of Andrew, who is clean and sober a number of years. He'll tell you a little bit about his story. And Andrew, if you could start with what you're doing today, how many years you have sober, and then we'll go back to what it was like, what happened, the role of your parents, and then what is life like today. So why don't you get us started?
All right, sounds good. Hey, everybody. I'm Andrew. I've been sober since February 7th of 2015, so a little over 5 years. Where I'm at today, my life is pretty good. I have a solid employment as an aquatic director at a fitness facility, managing the aquatics department, running some lessons and so on and so forth. And my life's pretty good today. Things are pretty stable, happy, joyous, and free. So that's me. That's where I'm at today.
So what are you doing with respect to work and so forth?
So as I mentioned, I'm an aquatic director running a swimming pool at a YMCA. And I've been working in pools for a long time. Even as a teenager, I was able to hold a job as a lifeguard. And since then, has just increased my education, my certifications, and got myself in a position where I was able to head a whole department, which has been good. It's been good to me so far.
So go back to how you got yourself started on the road to your wake-up call and recovery.
Okay, so I guess, getting started on the road, I had some experiences. Well, first off, I was kind of stuck in life. I really hadn't gone anywhere. I dropped out of university. I was just, I was working the same part-time job. I never got my driver's license or anything. I mean, I was kind of stuck. I was renting a house from my mom for next to nothing. Really just at a standstill in life, and I started asking myself why at a certain point, and I was really crippled by fear. There's a lot of things. I was afraid to even apply for better jobs. So when I started asking myself the questions as to why can't I move forward? Why am I still stuck here? One glaring thing kept popping up that maybe I have a problem with alcohol, which was a seed that was planted in my mind. Several years before I actually started to believe it. And eventually, out of numerous attempts to try to stop on my own, to where I realized that I don't think I have the capability to stop on my own. I was also using other drugs as well. Mostly marijuana and psychedelics and things like that. And every time I tried to stop on my own, I realized I couldn't stay stopped. And then eventually, when I was finally able to get all the substances out, and I was left with all the, all the emotions, thoughts, and feelings that I had been pushing away for years, I realized I wasn't going to be able to stay sober without getting help. So that's when I reached out on Facebook like a good young person. And I just vented all my problems right there for the public, right? And
how old were you at the time? How
I
old?
I was 24.
Okay.
I was almost 25. I was 24. It was a couple months before my 25th birthday, and I vented out, and a woman that I had worked with, who was a little bit quite a bit older than me, about twice my age, had reached out to me, and, unbeknown to me, she had been a member of a 12-step group for quite some time, and she invited to take me to a meeting. She drove across the city and picked me up, and I didn't decide until, she had offered it to me, and I took a few days to think about it, and it was a Sunday morning meeting at 8 a.m., and, I still am not the greatest morning person, but I decided 6 a.m. on Sunday that I would go, and I sent her a message and said, okay, I'll go, and she, with 2 hours, picks me up on the other side of town, takes me to the meeting on her side of town, and then drives me back home, and she did that for me for a couple months before she said, okay, now you got to get yourself here, but that was my start for recovery. That was my most genuine start, because there were a few times in the past before that where I had some exposure to AA or a 12-step group, and then there was another time where I had some hospitalization as a result of excessive drug use, and neither of those times really did it for me, but they did plant that seed. So, but when I honestly came to recovery, it was when I was 24, and it was really ultimately thanks to this person who reached out to me, because I don't know if I would have walked through the doors of a 12-step meeting, without somebody reaching out that hand.
So tell me, Andrew, give me an example of a typical day before you accepted help. Like, go back a year before you bottomed out, so to speak. What was a typical day like for you?
A typical day, I normally wake up early afternoon. It depends. There were different points where I was throughout my addiction where it had been worse and better. But when I was still drinking, typically I would sleep until the earliest I'd ever get up was like 10 or 11 in the morning. But normally it was like 12 or 1 or sometimes even later. I worked part time and mostly in the evenings. There were various other part-time jobs that I had throughout that time. And what I would do is I'd wake up and I would smoke some marijuana first thing every day. Without fail, that was always the first thing I would do. And and then who knows what I'd get into, for the next few hours, probably end up smoking some more marijuana, and then I would go to work for, 4 hours in the evening, 4 or 5 hours.
When you
start work at 3:30 or 5. What's that?
When you were working, you must have been stoned while you were working.
Oh, I was, I was almost always stoned. Almost guaranteed I was stoned every day, all throughout the day. I was never completely, completely blitzed, but I would maintain a certain buzz, throughout the whole day. And then by the end of the day, when I was leaving work, I would start drinking right after work, right when I get home, or I'd go to the bar, if it was when I was already of age. Surprisingly, for an alcoholic, I never tried to go to a bar underage. I guess I wanted to save that as something special, but didn't stop me from drinking, right? I just didn't drink at the bar. I had some friends who would get in and be like, "Oh, you can get into this place." I said, "Yeah, I want to have something when I turn 21. I mean, I've already been doing this stuff for years, kind of a silly thing, but then I would drink all night, until 2, 3 in the morning, or whenever the booze would run out, typically, or I'd pass out, whichever came first. There was normally not me making a decision to stop, And then sometimes, I would end up doing other drugs, whether it was, some cocaine or some psychedelics, some LSD or psilocybin mushrooms or something like that, or ecstasy. It kind of just, I was a pretty opportunistic person, so if something showed up, I would typically be open to it.
The only thing I didn't hear you said you tried or used was either heroin or fentanyl. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I've never used heroin. I've never used fentanyl. I've never smoked crack.
But almost everything else. Almost everything else. Almost everything else.
Almost everything else. Pretty much everything else. Yeah, I mean, I've tried, opiates, prescription opiates, which I wasn't a big fan of the downers for some odd reason. They just made me feel sick, and I didn't want to feel sick.
Yeah.
I wanted to be zonked out of my mind. I wanted to be somewhere else.
Okay. Tell me about the relationship you had with your mom before you woke up and after you woke up, because this is really important. Our audience is really meant for the loved ones of alcoholics and addicts, and how to go about healing that relationship going forward, or at least having a healthy relationship with a loved one who's an addict, and doing sort of the right Al-Anonic sorts of things. So can you cover that territory for us, please?
Yeah. So prior to getting sober, my relationship with my mom, there was, of course, there was different. I would call them, phases or whatever of our relationship. As a teenager, I'm the youngest of 3 kids, and then I have an older stepbrother as well who's older than all of us, and she also raised him for a while after my dad left, and before my dad left, she raised him for a while. So my mom was pretty exhausted. We all gave her a run for her money, and then turns out her youngest was the one with addiction problems, right? So she was pretty wiped out by the time I started getting into my addictions. Before that, I was generally a pretty good kid. She tried her best, I think, to try to help me, but I was so stubborn and hard-headed, rebellious, and thought that I was, not messing up my life. I really thought I was doing fine.
Yeah.
And she knew I wasn't, but I wouldn't, she would try to discipline me, and I would just not give her the chance, she would try to ground me, and what would I do? I would storm out, and it got to the point at one point in time in my later teenage years where she was actually afraid of me, physically afraid of me, and I would get real loud and arguments with her, and, yell at her a lot. There was one time that she smacked me, and I had this knee-jerk reaction. I smacked her back. It's one of my biggest regrets, honestly. And, instantly I was, shit, what did I just do? Excuse my language, sorry. I was like, oh no, what did I just do? I just hit my mom. And, it was an unconscious thing. And that was, after that point, I think she realized that there was really nothing she could do to stop me or to discipline me. But she was such a compassionate person and to the point of being an enabler, right, that she continued to make sure I had a roof over my head.
Yeah.
She continued to make sure I had everything I need, making sure I was fed and making sure that, whatever. And I took it all for granted, because I just wanted to get drunk and I didn't want to deal with her. I wanted to party with my friends.
So it sounds...
I was pretty bad. I had to steal from her, all that.
Sounds like your mom had her own turning point, almost her own sort of wake-up call that, as you mentioned, the realization that there was nothing really that she could do to get you to stop, but she could still love you and take care of you while all that was happening. You mentioned enabling. Looking back now, it sounds like there was a substantial amount of it, but were there times when she came to realize that she wasn't really helping you?
If she did have that realization, I was never aware of it because, and I know, my stepdad had told her numerous times, you got to kick that kid out, or you got to start charging him more rent, or you need to be, make sure he's paying you or whatever, because I would take advantage of my situation. She got married when I was 19 to a neighbor. She had been with him for, 10 plus years. It's a very healthy relationship. He's a really good guy, actually. I still am very close with him. And, consider him more of a father than my own, to be honest.
Right.
And, no offense to my dad, but that's a whole different topic we can get in if you want. But anyhow, she just continued to let me stay in the house regardless of if I was consistent with paying rent or not. She moved out and I was renting the house I grew up in, and, she was charging me less than I would be paying for a studio apartment, to be honest.
Right.
It was ridiculous. And what I was able to get away with, and I didn't do anything. She asked, she'd say, oh, can you cut the grass? 2 weeks later, I'd cut the grass. It was like pulling teeth to try to get me to do anything that a good tenant or whatever should do, or even a good son should do. I was so caught up in my own world. But she continued to let me have that space for next to nothing, and sometimes not even doing anything when I wouldn't pay the rent. And in fact, I remember there were times that for my birthday, I'd be like, Mom, can you just clear the debt that I have with you? Like, don't give me anything, just let me not owe you money anymore. And I can't tell you how many times that happened over years. I rented that house from her, even into my sobriety. Now, obviously, my sobriety, things were different. I was consistent with paying my rent. I was no longer taking advantage of the situation in the same way. I was still a little bit hard to get me to do things on time, but I was doing a lot better for sure. And I rented that house from her until a little bit before she passed away, actually.
So after you quote got clean and sober, what now? Almost 6 years ago, is that right?
About five years and 4 months or so.
A little bit more than 5 years ago. How did your relationship with your mother change at that point?
I think there was still a lot of damage that was done that was never addressed. I of course did my part to make amends. As I was taught in my 12-step program, and I sat down and had a good, honest conversation with her. And to be honest, she didn't want to look at the things that I had done wrong. She didn't want to hear about it.
Really?
She didn't want me to go over that. She said, "Look, just keep doing what you're doing. I'm happy. I'm proud of you." And she was proud of me. That's one thing she was proud of me, but I definitely feel on her end that she still carried a lot of the damage that I caused. She had a lot of stress in her life, and she had a pretty good life, especially after I got sober. I mean, she didn't have that much to worry about anymore, but I think she just kept holding on to that stuff, and because it's traumatic, and I have to remember that what I put my mother through, a therapist might call trauma.
Yeah. Were there any trust issues moving forward after you sobered up?
Yeah, I mean, there were some, but she saw how much progress I was making, and she definitely opened up. I mean, I remember the day I got keys to my mom's house, my mom and stepdad's house, and that was maybe more surprising because my stepdad was open to it. But I mean, mind you, when my 21st birthday was on Easter, and I was at their house, and I got completely hammered by 3 in the afternoon, and I was passed out at home by 5 p.m. And I made a complete fool of myself in front of my whole stepdad family, my family. It was one of the last Easters that my grandpa was coherent, and I just completely, got annihilated. And I had lost trust with my stepdad, especially at that point. I mean, he said, hey, Andrew can't drink at my house anymore ever again. And I had just turned 21. So I just remember the day that I got keys to their house was like mind blowing. That one, he would allow me those, and two, that my mom actually trusted me. I mean, my mom was such a big-hearted person that I think she always knew deep down inside that I loved her and that I didn't mean to cause harm. And I didn't. I mean, I don't think I ever really meant to cause harm. I was just a sick person, and I think to some level she knew that, whether she was, would say it or not. I think she understood that part. So when I sobered up and she saw me doing good, over the span of a few months, and then ultimately a few years before she passed, we definitely regained trust. She trusted me completely. I mean, she didn't necessarily trust me to cut the grass on exactly the day that she wanted me to cut it, but she knew it would get done, versus before where it wouldn't get done, but in general, she would trust me, she would trust me a lot. And,
right.
The last couple of years she was sick with cancer, pancreatic cancer, and, she would call me and give her rides. She would, whatever it was, take her to the hospital, and she knew she could trust me to do those things. And I was happy to do them. I wish I had more time, to do more things with her.
Right. Well. So Andrew, what do you do today to stay clean and sober and grow as a human being?
Today, I still participate in 12-step groups. I sometimes talk to my sponsor, not probably as often as I should. But another thing that I've really gotten into is I practice with a Buddhist community. That's an international Buddhist community, and I've gotten really involved in that community. And I do a lot of I try to do what we would call in 12-step programs service work. In that community, I help organize local events. I help facilitate things with our local group in the city I live in. And I use a lot. I use the methods, the meditations. I follow the suggestions of my teacher, the teacher of the organization, and and that's been really helpful for me, especially in the last few years. Working with meditations, different meditations, and trying to maintain a certain view about life. Seeing everybody as having what we call Buddha nature, seeing everybody as having really great qualities, and trying to hold that view and trying to act like a Buddha till I become one, as we say in that group.
I hear you. What about the 12 steps specifically? How they have helped you If so, change internally?
So, what happens, and, my sponsor has said this, maybe you've heard this before, is that you do your work on the steps, and then you let the steps do their work on you.
Right.
So it's kind of like a cup of tea, right? You put the tea bag in. If you pull it out right away, you're just going to have hot water. If you leave it in too long, especially, say like with green tea, you leave it in too long, it gets bitter, But what happens is that something changes, right? You go from this clear water now to this, green water that's flavorful. So what I found is that through working the steps, the 12 steps, it's changed something inside of me, just like the water and tea, right? Where it's now instilled some working parts of my life. These principles that become working parts of my life. The principles that come from
there you go.
The step, the honesty, just taking responsibility for my actions. Being able to notice when I've done wrong or caused harm, and then take responsibility for that and face up to it. If I hurt somebody, go up to that person and apologize. And those are simple things that I couldn't do before.
Right.
Being honest was not always easy.
Yeah.
Or I thought I was being honest, but I was lying by omission. Or
Right.
something like this. It's just there's a lot of things that I have an interesting view about these things today because lately I've pretty heavily influenced from my Buddhist practice, that I've developed these habits. As an alcoholic, I developed all of these different habits, and maybe even this was happening before alcoholism, right? Where, I had these instincts, just like everybody else, instincts to be financially secure, emotionally secure, sexually secure, whatever it was. I have these natural human instincts, but I eventually developed these habits that were based from those instincts, but to an extreme, to
Right.
try to fill those,
Right.
to try to fill those holes.
Okay. We're running up against our clock now, but I want to ask you, what advice would you give a parent or a loved one of an alcoholic or addict who is still using? What sort of mindset should they adopt?
Well, another good thing that I've learned from my sponsor, because there's nothing new here, right? This is all just shared, passed down from one person to the next, is to love, to be able to detach with love, right?
Right.
So to have a little bit of distance, understanding that, hey, no matter what I do, they may never get better.
Yeah.
But I can still love this person, and I can set a healthy boundary for me.
Okay.
I can take care of me.
Right.
And I think that's my biggest advice is for people to, as much as we love somebody, we have to take care of ourselves when we're dealing with people with addiction, because it can be taxing to try to fix somebody. It can be taxing, and it can sacrifice our own sanity. So,
Perfect.
I think this is really important.
Well, we're going to have to leave it here, Andrew. I will call you back later to wrap up, and can't thank you enough for your time, and thanks for staying up. Thanks for staying up, Andrew.
Yeah.
Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
So what did we learn from Andrew today? As he mentioned, number one, it's rare that an addict or alcoholic becomes addicted to only one substance these days. It's called polyaddiction, and that's the norm. Andrew pretty much said that he tried everything. He used everything except for heroin, fentanyl, and smoking crack. So he says he did everything else, pretty much. Number two, mother is the great enabler. She tries to help him stop while at the same time allows him to live virtually rent-free in her second home. So love overcomes common sense, if you will. And she's the great enabler. She loves her son, but at the same time, she is doing everything she can to get him to stop. 3, Andrew hated the way he felt and wanted to stop, but he didn't know how. He came to realize that he could not quit on his own and needed to reach out and beg for help. And finally, number 5, connecting to other young recovering people got him into his first 12-step meeting where he surrendered his old ways of thinking, and he's been clean and sober ever since. Thank you for tuning in today. It's my fervent hope we've given you new insight and new hope that will lighten your burden. For our hearts go out to all who suffer the effects of addictive disorder. Please give us your feedback at info@safehouserehab.com. By all means, ask us any question you like, and we'll answer on air if you will. And if you want to leave us your first name and city, we'll recognize you too, of course. This podcast is sponsored by safehouserehab.com, where we take a modern approach to recovery, something all families of those who suffer deserve. Tune in next week for more.